Hello, everyone. Welcome to Navigating India. So, today we have with us Professor Dev Nath Pathak to talk about his recent paper published in Economic and Political Weekly titled COVID-19 Cuts in Sociology of South Asia. So, before we start discussing, if I can state what I think is your thesis, it is this. Despite several attempts to break the geopolitical and intellectual borders and boundaries in the sociology of South Asia, it remained restricted to the isolated territorial republics. And now, with a huge human crisis like COVID 19, when sociologists were either fumbling for an adequate way of seeing and resorting to older ways, it is now time to build a sociology of South Asia with concrete efforts. Is this what your thesis is?
Yes. In fact, this whole idea about sociology has to be in the first place discussed at the level of social sciences in general. Uh, Across social sciences, we notice, we have noticed for a while, a strong presence of intellectual boundaries. Intellectual boundaries which are operationalized in the name of disciplinary gatekeeping, the protection of disciplinary distinctions, and and many other reasons why these intellectual boundaries are made to look more solid than they are. Uh, by birth, these disciplinary boundaries in social sciences may not have been so solid. They may not have been so rigid to the extent of appearing regressive and scuttling any kind of possible advances in social sciences. If you go back in time and try to make sense of the disciplinary modernity, right? Intellectual modernity, which guided the emergence of some of these social science disciplines, you will find that at the beginning, there was a lot of feeding on variety of sources, diversity of sources. You name any of those earliest philosophers of social sciences, you would not find them so regressive about a particular way of thinking, a particular way of seeing. In spite of the fact that there was no mention of the word interdisciplinarity then in the history of social sciences, you do not hear the word interdisciplinarity, you do not hear the word multidisciplinarity or transdisciplinary or post-disciplinary. None of these buzzwords you hear in the history of social sciences in the very beginning. And yet, there was this openness to learn from different kind of sources, to the extent that one was also learning from the religious sources which seemed to be some kind of non-modern sources. Even those sources informed the first generation of philosophers, scholars of social sciences, which means that at the birth of social sciences, something which was very free, there was great deal of intellectual liberty to explore any area of inquiry, to learn from any area of inquiry, that began to dwindle as we advanced, or the so called advancement in social sciences happened. In various disciplines, a long drawn process of standardization happened. And that standardization was more or less in tune with the demands of nation, nationality, the local context. Simultaneously, it was also in tune with that kind of standardization in social sciences and various disciplines of social sciences was also in tune with various kind of agencies which were responsible for promoting social science research. So I would say that there are various ways in which strong intellectual boundaries have been erected, maintained, nourished beyond imaginable points. And as a result, today, till today, when we come across some of the young scholars who are planning their researches, we find them mostly grappling with this seemingly insurmountable challenge. Uh, and the challenge is precisely as to how to stick to the boundaries, right? They're expected by their senior peers, by the institutions, by the nation state, they're expected to stick to the intellectual boundaries. It is almost like in common sense world, we expect citizens to stick to a very well-defined faith, very well-defined identity, very well-defined uh, area of belonging. And if somebody tries to be fuzzy, or if somebody looks like something very fuzzy in terms of identity, in terms of faith, such people are immediately considered a suspect. Like it is in the everyday life in society, in common sense world, I find that similar kind of tendency persists in the social science practices as well. Now, in this backdrop, I have tried to narrow down my focus on the history of sociology in the region of South Asia. But it can be very well applied to history of other social science disciplines. For example, history of history itself, history of historical research, history of political research, history of any kind of intellectual, modern intellectual tradition would give you very clear idea that not only geopolitical border, cartographic border, also the boundaries of our mind have played very significant role in not letting knowledge tradition, modernity of knowledge advance. So we have to decide whether we want to be accomplice in this very regressive, very, what should I say, monolithic kind of uh, growth which has happened in between, or we want to move ahead from here. If
Another,
you want,
sorry.
yeah.
So another remark that I think you have quoted one of your colleagues anonymously in this paper, right? Which I quote, we need to stick to our target audience following the requirement and the fulfill expectations. Otherwise, who will read what we write, right? So there is this narrow downing of this discipline. Is it also because they are trying to find certain audience and it's becoming more of an earning field, right? Rather than
No, narrow down is because of my own professional commitment, and you can also say because of my own existential anxiety, that if I do not straight on address a particular disciplinary area, then of course the same logic will apply which is quoted anonymously in this essay, as to who would really take interest in a generic kind of uh, uh, diagnosis, so to say. So therefore, this narrowing down. But this narrowing down has a sinister background as well. What is a sinister background? Uh, Immanuel Wallerstein, a very reputed scholar, most of us read Immanuel Wallerstein. Immanuel Wallerstein was given a humongous task by a commission called Gulbenkian Commission. It's a Gulbenkian foundation in Europe. And Wallerstein was given a task to head a commission, which was called Gulbenkian Commission, supported by Gulbenkian Foundation. And that commission had members from various science backgrounds, from natural sciences as well as social sciences, from philosophy, anthropology, and mathematics as well. And they came up with, after many rounds of discussions, the commission came up with a report. And the report showed us as to how sciences as well as social sciences have been given this disposition to stay narrow in focus. That narrowing down has happened in the 19th century emergence of social sciences. And this tendency has become almost a sacred, almost a given today. One cannot help but narrow down. I agree that, for a young researcher, narrowing down is a practical requirement. It's a convenience. It's beneficial. it's beneficial to be focused on a micro context. But in the meantime, some of the senior peers, including myself, would always advise young scholars to be able to connect this micro context, this narrowed down context, this narrowed down focus should be eventually connected with the macro context, which means that whatever I'm discussing with my narrowed focus, I must present it in the larger global context. Otherwise, it will become very peculiar, very idiosyncratic, maybe very iconoclastic, but something with which the larger audience would not be able to relate. So this is the way in which narrowing down has to be understood. Now, let me come to the second part, which is very strongly expressed in that quotation that you have referred to. And I also share that anxiety. It's an existential anxiety. Who are we writing for? Who are we researching for? Who are we talking to? Who is our target audience? Who is our niche that we are catering to? So on and so forth. Now, this existential anxiety, uh, this is an existential requirement to have an audience. If I am producing something, I would like some people to debate about it, some people to contest, some people to disagree thoroughly, some people to have some kind of resonance, so on and so forth. But then this existential requirement may translate into some kind of existential anxiety if I have confined myself in a particular area where a particular kind of audience should take interest in me. I am not writing for the larger audience beyond these confines. My research, my writing, my readings, my thinking, my way of arguing, my way of seeing the world, everything is right from the word go, confined in a particular framework, in a particular box, in a particular area of inquiry. In the name of expertise, of course, we justify, by using the word expertise, we justify this confinement. If I'm so confined, then obviously I will have a monstrous amount of existential anxiety as to who would read me. If I do not write like this, if I do not think like this, if I do not see the world like this, who would read me? Who would validate me or even invalidate me, right? So that this existential anxiety, I would say, is of sinister nature. If I serve it, it breeds further. It takes new avatar, and it continues. I pass on this anxiety as a senior peer to my junior peer, to my research scholars, and that becomes very deadly kind of circle from which it seems there is no escape. Coming back to the same Gulbenkian Commission report, which helped us understand as to how these kind of confinements, how these distinct culture in social sciences, as well as in natural sciences, as well as in humanities, how they emerged after presenting that picture of the emergence of sinister confinement. The commission, uh, presided by Emanuel Wallerstein, also advocated something very important. And what was their advocacy about? It was in one line: open social sciences, right? And the report was published also with the same title, Open Social Sciences, which was basically to suggest as to how social sciences have to be restructured in such a manner that we are no longer prisoners of these intellectual confinements, right? This was in late 1990s that the commission was functional. Early 2000, the report came out. And today, when I am expressing my anxiety that there are these confinements through which sociologists are working, you can understand that the commission's report made no difference in the real situation as far as practices in various social science disciplines is concerned, right? We all should be concerned about this fact that in the name of expertise, I have no problem with the idea of expertise, by the way. It is not to debunk the idea of expertise. It's good to have expertise. But expertise in what manner? We need to also keep in our mind, Rishwant, that we cannot mimic the notion of expertise which is there in some of the fields of some of the fields of sciences. For example, uh, in medical sciences, sometimes it is necessary to keep that idea of expertise intact, right? Otherwise, there may be a medical hazard, which nobody with a patient around would like to face. So, even though we may be critical about expertise operationalized, even in the medical sciences, we are critical. For example, we are really aghast to see that a physician would administer a pill, and for a while that pill would keep your blood pressure or blood sugar at certain level, and after some years you realize that there is some problem in your in your renal tract. You go and see a nephrologist. The nephrologist would declare it to you that the pills that you have been taking for these years have actually adversely affected your kidney, so you should not have taken. Now you are in this very weird situation that the physician should have anticipated this for you. Now you have come to a nephrologist who almost tells you that everything your physician advised you to do has led you to this situation, right? If there is a bypass surgery happening, that heart surgeon would like to have other experts who would give expert comments about the other body parts so that the bypass surgery could be conducted. You understand the functional importance of this kind of expertise, but you also do not understand as to how someone who understands heart cannot understand the other organs of the body which are related to heart. And heart is not a standalone. Kidney is not a standalone, or for that matter, any part of your body is not a standalone. They are all integrally connected. And hence, the idea of expertise, even in medical science, has to take into account that body parts are interconnected, and hence, expertise ought to be in some kind of organic interrelationship. If the idea of expertise is presented to you in separation with expertise in other fields, then there is something problematic about that idea of expertise. Now, having said that, let's come to social sciences. Now, we know that in social sciences, we do not deal in the way a doctor would be dealing with human body. A doctor has this human body in the safe confinement of a clinic, right? In a hospital, in an operation theater. It's a very controlled situation. Social scientists do not deal with bodies in that manner, right? Those bodies which we meet, they are almost our extensions. We are not apart from them, right? Uh, that divide between self and other is minimal unless a social scientist has this Faustian idea of maintaining that divide between self and other, which was the case in the colonial modernity, right? Unfortunately, a lot of us, because of ill training or because of our own incapability or because of something which a Malaysian sociologist Syed Hussain Alatas had called captive mind. Because we are captive mind, because we are intellectually lazy, so therefore we try to perpetuate this self and other divide. But as a matter of fact, our expertise cannot be based on that divide of self and other. It is harmful for us as scholars, it is harmful for our society which we are trying to study, or the cultural, social, political reality that we are trying to study. So I would say that the notion of expertise coming from medical sciences, or for that matter, natural sciences, cannot be mimicked as it is in social sciences. Here we have very different context of study, and hence there is need to have distinguishable, qualitatively very different kind of notion of expertise, which would not be, which would not uh, perpetrate some of those things that we have been criticizing in various parts of social sciences, right? So to break free from uh, all these confinement, it is necessary to get back to the fundamentals that have become some sort of sacred, unquestionable sacred for us. I hope I have answered a bit of your question and also added more to it.
Yes, sir. I mean, going a little ahead, there were some attempts to break these boundaries, and one of it is what you said in the paper 1997, the conference that happened in Tata Institute of Social Sciences called the Future of Sociology in South Asia Conference, right? And in that particular conference, this has been highlighted, and an attempt has been made to break, and it wasn't succeed. Like, okay, so personal question: were you part of that conference back then?
No, I was not.
Okay, okay.
I
Um,
was an undergrad student. There is no possibility of being part of it.
Okay, sir. Okay. So despite this conference, why it didn't turn out? Why the because we constantly read even some papers, right? Even I think 2, 3 issues before your paper in EPW, there was a paper on sociology, the state of sociology in India, right? We constantly see this crisis papers, but nobody actually picked it up and tried to break these boundaries. There's no specific school that has attempted to. Why is that limitation?
Two things I would say. One, one part of your question is about the conference. The other is about this whole business of talking about crisis. Uh, for the second part, the crisis part, I would say that we are a tribe of crisis mongers, right? We we love crisis. It's almost like vultures practice. We would be the happiest people if there is crisis in society. It seems that social scientists await a crisis with such amount of eagerness that they feel very sad and unsatisfied if the situation is really normal, right? This is typically vulture behavior, right? If there are people dying in the street, we would find an opportunity to write about it and to further our scholarship. This is typically vulture behavior. So crisis mongering is not what I would like to join in. Instead, what I have tried to do, and I have been trying to do, and I will continue to do, is that I try to present a reflection which is based on my own practices, which are not to perpetuate any crisis, which are basically to break that circle, create that kind of rupture, which may allow next generation of scholars to take more risk with their subject matter, with their way of seeing, with their methodology, with the kind of questions that they would like to frame. They need to take more risk uh, than they are trained to do. So let me come to the first part of question, which is about conference. It must be a very important conference, no doubt about it. It's focused on South Asia. It is talking about the possibility of doing different kind of sociology, anthropology in the context of South Asia. No doubt about the thematic importance of the conference. But Rishwant, I suppose there is yet to be written a very honest, hard hitting polemics on the academic conferences in the region of South Asia. And now I'm beginning to notice that this is the case even in other parts of the world. Conferences have become, what to say, for the want of a better word, let me very quickly say that they are big talk shows, right? There was this Marxist scholar, Guy Debord, who had talked about spectacles of the society. And uh, most of these conferences are very much like that spectacle, where
I
hyper real is more important than real.
I
Yes,
am
go
afraid
ahead.
you will be cancelled from the
Yeah,
conferences.
yes. No, absolutely no problem with that. I have been trying to avoid on my own. But even then, sometimes there are friends involved, there are students involved, and one has to say yes to them. Uh, Absolutely no problem. I understand. Again, the same existential anxiety that, you know what, I would not be invited, and therefore I cannot present this kind of criticism. But it's not criticism about those friends who are involved. It's not simply a criticism about the scholars who are participating in them. It's the it's, it's supposed to be a critique of the framework in which these deliberations happen. You name, in last one decade, you name a single conference where you witnessed a real intellectual dispute. When I was a beginner in social sciences, what excited me was the idea that there would be debates, there would be conferences in which there would be serious debates, no matter which party disagrees in what intensity, right? There would be some very important kind of intellectual dispute, which will show us new pathways, which will give us new set of questions. But you go to these conferences in large number, the same old questions are repeated. There is more or less similar kind of recapitulation of explanations. There is, so ritualistic kind of presentation of arguments that you feel that it is almost like a priest who is performing some kind of ritual event on somebody, on some child's birth, on somebody's death, or for a marriage ceremony, right? It means nothing. You ask the participants in those ceremonies, what do you understand about these uh, hymns and these mantras being recited, and they will be clueless about the meanings, right? So likewise, I see that, in these conferences, there are those priests, high priests, who would recite all kind of, same old mantras, and the meanings of those mantras are lost now. Those arguments have lost meanings, right? Those diagnoses, those explanations are not addressing contemporary concerns. Instead, they are just to maintain the status quo of academic superiority of some people, right? It is just to perpetuate the Brahminical hierarchy, which is very implicit in the framework in which conferences happen, right? In spite of the fact that a conference may be on the issue of marginality, on the issue of gendered inequality, on the issues concerning Dalit, the framework is very Brahminical. As a result, what we find that, there is nothing coming old, nothing new coming out. It is the same old canon which will be produced and reproduced. It will be the same old hierarchy which will be reproduced. Now tell me, in this kind of situation, what kind of possibility these conferences, and nowadays we see mega conferences, exactly like Debo would have thought of the whole society, spectacle of conferences with so much flower involved, so many bouquet involved. These days there are now arti and some kind of worshipping that happens before conferences. So what we are making out, when the big shot, an eminent scholar comes in the conference, when the chief guest is speaking in the conference, you would notice the way, the litany that follows, the way in which all those present on dais will be named with due reverence, right? The argument is less important. More important is actually the framework of conference which is being reproduced, right? And that is the reason why one has to be slightly and fairly polemical about academic conferences all over the world, all over the world. These academic conferences, unfortunately, are not doing what they should have been doing. They have, for some purposes, if I can use in a very sociological sense, this concept of, they're dysfunctional events. They're not fulfilling what they're supposed to be fulfilling. Instead, they are fulfilling the agenda, the objective of those who want to maintain status quo, who do not seek any change. And conference without an objective of change is really no conference of mind. It is conference of some kind of vested interest. It's not conference of intellectual possibilities. That is one thing. Secondly, coming to that particular conference which you have referred to, which was inaugurated, the inaugural speech was by Immanuel Wallerstein. And Immanuel Wallerstein talked about the freedom from the confinement in that conference. But the whole of conference was actually about how to remain confined in the given framework. The conference became a conference of finding ways to suggest the sociologists as to how to serve nation building in the nation building program. Now, my problem is not with the nation building program or the community development program in which sociologists and the larger whole of social scientists can participate. But that alone cannot be the purpose of our intellectual endeavors. We are not merely to participate in those programs. Even our participation in those programs, which are supported by nation state, which are supported by funding agencies or non-governmental organizations of various rank and file, uh, even our participation in those programs would become substandard participation, would be intellectually impoverished participation if we are not building up on our craft, if we are not perpetually working on our craft, on our art, on our arguments, on our theoretical enrichment, conceptual enrichment, on our methodological innovations. If we are not doing any of those things, or if we are compromising on all those fundamentals that we are supposed to do, and then we are going to participate in nation building program, what would be the quality of our participation, right? So that is my concern. In that conference, the more or less the whole conference became as to how sociologists can participate in some of these crying requirements of nation state. One is committed. I mean, we are all patriotic, we are all nationalists, we would like to participate in nation building program, and we would certainly like to maintain the practical relevance of the knowledge that we are trying to uh, construct. But then our participation would be very poor, and that is where my concern comes in. That if we are not continuously guiding our scholars, if we are not continuously indulged ourselves in the business of advancement, intellectual advancement, our participation would be not on our terms. Our participation would be on the terms and conditions set by more powerful bodies, the organizations, the nations, nation state. So, do we want to remain slaves of these larger organizations, or we want to participate with our intellectually very sound, very progressive, very advancing, very flourishing kind of abilities? That is where my concern is about that conference, and in general about any conference that we witness, be they online or offline. You might have noticed during the COVID time, oh my God, there was such a spurt of online conferences. I had started joking that, probably if we do a proper statistics, we may find out, to our dismay, to our shock, that the number of COVID patients was lower than the number of online conferences during the COVID time, right? And what one should ask as to why it was so. Uh, what really is the reason? One can't give up on thinking critically about the reasons behind some of these things, which appear very banal and seemingly non-issue, but they are all issues for me. Why did that happen? Some people would say that it was very enabling situation for people who wanted to organize conferences from different parts of underprivileged parts of the world. I agree with that idea too, that it is technologically probably enabling to have scholars participating in online conference from all over the world without investing much of capital as far as the logistics is concerned. So that is really enabling for the third world academics. But that alone is not a reason. There is more to it, because none of those conferences were trying to seek for the changes in the way we engage with our fundamentals. That is one part of your question, the long answer to one part of your question. Second part is about crisis mongering. Um, I don't know if you're aware, there is a scholar, journalist, Akbar Zaidi from Pakistan, who wrote about crisis in social sciences in Pakistan. And he did not narrow down to sociology, thankfully. He was talking about the whole of social sciences in Pakistan. And whatever he had to count as the crisis factor in social sciences in Pakistan, you would find that similar kind of crisis, the causal factor behind the crisis in social sciences as well as in sociology in India and in other parts of South Asia, we have heard of. We have read about series of small articles appearing in Economic and Political Weekly, but also in Sociological Bulletin. And we get a sense that there is a recognition of some kind of crisis in social sciences. But this, my complaint about that whole crisis discussion was that, and therefore I said that, it almost becomes crisis mongering rather than constructively engaging with the crisis. Why? Because most of those discussions on crisis in social sciences in South Asia, including Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, India, Nepal, um, that whole discussion is primarily uh, a kind of lament on the decline in standard, decline in quality. Now, as a scholar, as a teacher, as senior peers, people would have that kind of concern that, students, these neophyte researchers, the new apprentices, they are not doing hard work. Their questions are not very well thought out. Their methodologies are not clear. Their writing certainly has very poor standard. So this can be a very genuine lament. But my point is that, is crisis only about standard, or there is some other kind of crisis too? Some other scholars have talked about the structural crisis. Universities are not in that mode where it can be fully functional. They are fund strapped. They have, and there is a political economy behind this crisis. So scholars can't do much about it, and it persists, so and so forth. But again, my problem is that, who has stopped an individual scholar from practicing intellectual freedom? Can anyone stop anyone from practicing intellectual freedom if I decide that today I am not going to use this kind of methodology? Rather, I would explore my methodology from literary sources, the literature that I have been reading since childhood. And I have realized that, social sciences have to receive a lot from those literary sources. Who can stop me? I can very well justify that, some of these literary materials we need to look at, because Karl Popper long time ago had said that do not ask for resources. Do not ask me for the legitimacy of sources. Ask me what is my argument and prove my argument wrong. You're most welcome to do that. Right? Not only Karl Popper, you can find a whole lot of philosophers of sciences who have set me free to find my methodologies, to find my conceptual tools from variety of sources, to bring, say, for example, conceptual ideas from popular cinema and discuss those conceptual ideas from popular cinema with social scientific theories, established social scientific theories, and that is how I can move ahead. So who stops me from doing that? Of course, some people would scoff at. Some people would scoff at me that, what is this guy doing? This is outlandish. How can he bring in some of these ideas from these sources? They are not from the popular canons in the discipline.
I think you showed there. There's
So
a lot to talk
yes, there
about,
would be that kind
but
of risk.
from what we have just spoken, I would like to take forward with one question, right? So you said conferences have almost become dysfunctional, right? Now, if I ask you what should be the tenets to make conferences functional, what would they be? A manifesto.
Well, who am I to give a manifesto? It really requires our community, the academic community, to do soul searching and come up with certain kind of, I would not say manifesto, but certain kind of vision of uh, conferences, academic conferences. I mean, what one is really seeking for. My concern is largely that, what we are seeking for through those conferences in large number is not something academic. It is primarily to serve certain kind of technical requirement, maybe for promotion, maybe for intellectual, institutional showcasing, but not really intellectual advancement. So I believe all of us, or maybe some of us, who are conscious of the anomalies of academic events, and who do not want these events to become mere spectacles of our time, um, and who do not want, we may have practical interest in these academic events serving our uh, very technical kind of requirement. Fair enough, but then we also need to come up with a larger vision behind such events. And my one line vision statement for myself would be that it should be primarily to seek for certain kind of advancement. It would mean that it would set academics intellectually free enough to undertake necessary risk and frame new questions, give new ideas about how to see the world around us, come up with new arguments, fire imagination of our young scholars with novelty rather than the same old method, technique, theory, concept. Uh, so that would be my, critical understanding. But as far as manifesto is concerned, nobody can really have one. It requires great deal of soul searching on the part of those who are part of this community.
That's right. I think the second question is, so yeah, so you have already touched upon it saying, yes, institutions, there are funding constraints, there are university constraints, right? The institutions. And you said nobody can stop an author from his free spirit to pursue his subject seriously. But certainly we can't underplay the institution's role, right? So now being a deep part of academia, can you give a reflection of the state of institutions? Are they willing to support the kind of sociology in South Asia that you are talking about, right? So the cross-country financial supports do we get? Because we remember the initial years after independence, the field of sociology, right? We have scholars like S.E. Dubey closely working with the government and writing monographs based on government programs to see the changes in village structures. So I don't think we have such a things right now. So how do we navigate through this funding and what is the state of it right now?
I totally agree with your observation that the institutions are not uh, geared to provide with the necessary support. Uh, Institutions have been affected at various levels. It's not just state that is affecting institutions, which is the usual trope that we get to hear, that state support to higher education is going low and therefore institutions are not flourishing the way they should be. It is not just about state, I would say. It's also about the academic class within these institutions, which I would say that have given up on their ability to explore various ways, various avenues, explore possibility. I would say that this is a compromise done by academic class too, which includes both the senior peers who are in professorial positions and also junior peers who may be just starting with their research career. At various levels, we have started playing safe, started following our comfort and convenience rather than doing the much necessary thing of taking risk and finding ways forward. Institutions can be disabling, can be enabling, or can be inert as far as providing support is concerned. But then I would believe that in higher education, who would really object if I want to enrich my understanding of a particular phenomenon, particular social reality, by making references to ideas and understanding coming from across the borders. Who can really stop me if I refer to some of the significant works done by scholars in various parts of the region of South Asia? It does not require me to secure a visa to read a scholar's work and incorporate that work in my own research, does it? It does not require me to have a dialogue with a scholar who is sitting in Pakistan, and that dialogue can be recorded and can be published on these digital platforms. So, do I need, or do that scholar, my counterpart, need a visa or a state permission to do this? It is not that kind of these possibilities have not been explored, I would say. On the whole, we have not understood the idea of intellectual freedom. Our idea of intellectual freedom is more about giving slogans than realizing it in our practices. Intellectual freedom, which has been talked about amongst academics for such a long time. But to begin with, this freedom comes from the fact that one is free enough at pedagogic level, one is free enough in the classroom to conduct the classroom, uh, uh, fire the imagination of the youngsters, evoke new ideas, and encourage younger scholars into starting a new walking a new pathway. At pedagogic level, this freedom is entirely available, but I have also seen that this freedom is abused by some of us in the academic class. We try, in the name of this freedom, we also try to misguide students, right? Or on the other hand, something which Max Weber had long time ago anticipated in that essay titled Science as a Vocation. And he talked about certain kind of tendency amongst pedagogues. Some pedagogues would like to be some kind of celebrity amongst student, and therefore they would compromise on the whole academic interest, and instead they would try to provide some other kind of ideas to students which may not be helpful in doing anything related to academics, right? So, because students are so connected with us, we must be careful about how we handle them, what we ask them to do. I have also seen that some of us in academics, some people in academic class also try to pit one students against another colleague, another faculty member. There is this such severe compromise on collegiality, and so on and so forth. Many things happen in academic class in the name of intellectual freedom. And that is where I believe that this whole idea of intellectual freedom, as to how to really bring it about in our academic pursuits, that has to be discussed. What does this intellectual freedom mean? I totally support the idea of intellectual freedom. I totally support in academic autonomy in framing one's course, in coming up with research questions, in planning researches. But I believe that large chunk of us in academic class are not interested in that kind of academic freedom. We are interested in academic freedom to do all sorts of things which are more or less of nuisance value, right? Which may be more or less driven by our personal desire to become some kind of celebrity, become some kind of heroic figure, become very popular, very easily, very cheaply popular with the students and colleagues. Those are the things where I notice that this idea of intellectual freedom is utilized. But where it should have been utilized, where it should be utilized, is not. Uh, you know, that's my concern. That the sooner we begin to utilize it in other spheres which are very academic in nature, which are cultural in nature, which are social in nature, until we start doing that, our freedom itself will be jeopardized. The reason why there is onslaught on our intellectual freedom is also because we have not used our intellectual freedom in the healthiest possible manner. And that may be a clarion call for academic class to return to the idea of intellectual freedom and ask ourselves, what are we trying to do with it? Are we trying to become dubious pedagogues, which was anticipated and critically anticipated by someone like Max Weber so early on in 20th century? Or we are trying to utilize intellectual freedom to become a pedagogue who would be leading, who would be showing pathways to our youngsters to make necessary intellectual academic advances in whichever part of social science that we are located.
Yeah, I think one more point I would like to pick up. So one of the points is like academics just want to play safe, right? So very personal question. Is there any kind of a cancel culture in the Academy of Sociology in India?
There
And
is generally a cancel culture. No, there
and,
has been.
and what forms it
Yes.
will take? So yeah.
Uh, Obviously, it does not take the kind of vulgar form that you see in other industries. It would not take the kind of form that it may take in the streets, amongst the hooligans, amongst those who may convert into, who may take to all kind of lynching, be it intellectual lynching or physical lynching. So, of course, it is a different kind of cancel culture over here. It is a cancel culture based on silos of mind, that, I do not belong to your group of scholars. My area of interest is different from yours, or my network is different from yours. My cohort is different from yours. So that may, this kind of, inter cohort, inter network cancellation of each other might take place. But strongly that I have noticed, this cancel culture is almost cancerous along the ideological lines. So anybody who would give slightest of hint of speaking for the right wing politics would become an eyesore for those who speak for left wing politics, right? This whole business, this whole polarity, I wonder how this polarity survives in the uh, space, intellectual space which is supposed to be guided by intellectual freedom, how this kind of polarity would survive. And because of this polarity, there would not be any dialogue between these two rivaling ideological groups, right? I do not support any, one may not be supportive of any ideological group, but there may not be necessarily a wall between, as far as the dialogue is concerned, there need not be a wall between these two groups, or for that matter, any groups, right? Instead, there has to be critical debate without getting personal against each other, without attacking, slandering each other. If there is this kind of intellectual confidence that one is coming up with a very powerful, very persuasive argument, then with this confidence, one should go out in very good critical public debate rather than getting personal against each other, rather than trolling each other, be it in virtual space or in real space, rather than employing students to uh, 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 become vindictive against each other, rather than employing institutional power to penalize each other, rather than doing all these nuisance. One should get into debate. One should get to the basics of our academic existence. And the most basic thing of our academic existence, as someone like Bell Hooks had very powerfully shown us in that book, Teaching to Transgress, the most beautiful thing with us is this dialogue, right? Bell Hooks was inspired by Paulo Freire. Paulo Freire, who in the Pedagogy of the Oppressed had talked about this dialogue, love being the most important emotion in dialogue for Freire, right? And Bell Hooks was citing Freire to come up with the same idea, that it is the most fundamental and most beautiful thing of our academics is a dialogue, right? In the dialogue, if we are not personally against each other, even if we disagree with each other, I can tell you, Rishwant, that Rishwant, that point of yours I find very illogical. Rishwant can tell me very easily that, I find these points very illogical. And we will not mind it. Why? Because we are not getting personal against each other. We are not saying that, Rishwant, you're a stupid fellow. Your ideology sucks.
That's
right? You're a supporter of this mandir or that masjid. You suck. I don't get that there.
you're
That
right.
is the foreclosure of a dialogue, right? I find that this polarity in academic space, as it is in our day-to-day life, is a great harm to us. It is not letting us talk to each other. Forget about uh, if the word dialogue sounds too dramatic, forget about that. Even this normal conversation, normal chit chatting is becoming such a rarity, such a luxury. And that only reflects as to what we have become. That only reflects our deeper weaknesses and deeper anomalies.
Yes, that's a wonderful view. Deviating a little bit, I think one point which you mentioned in your paper, and which is actually not a focus of your paper, I think which I find extremely powerful, is when you talked about nation building, right? And I quote, populist politics worldwide has made nation building a premise for enacting anti-human policies and politics, right? Would you reflect it on it a bit?
Yes, this is, as usual, a lot of these ideas are put in very condensed form in the written essays, because writing has all kind of instructions imposed, so word limit and so on and so forth, and therefore one does not elaborate on everything that may itself become a full-fledged paper. So you would notice uh, uh, across this, whole, populist thing that we have been talking about in last 1 decade now, or more than a decade, we find that to justify all sorts of policy-driven, policy-based, or all sorts of political maneuvering, this idea of nation building is invoked. That this is being done because this will contribute to strengthening nation's economy, nation's society, so on and so forth. So nation building becomes very easy tool to come up with all sorts of things which may be otherwise very detrimental to citizens' interest, right? It may be detrimental in the sense that it does not it does not leave much choice to the citizens. That way it is detrimental. It does not, it also obscures citizens' vision of the world around, and that way it is harmful. This nation building cannot be a justification to obscure citizens' critical consciousness. If it is doing that, then this is not nation building. Then it is nation destroying policy, perspective, or politics. Nobody would ever disagree with the idea of nation building. We are all patriotic at heart, and we all want to serve our nation. And we are, by doing all sorts of jobs, small or big, we are actually serving the nation. By talking about various kind of issues, we are actually serving. Even the most rabid critique of nation is actually serving the nation, right? By providing that rabid critique, one is helping us, that critique is helping us to understand as to how nations should be imagined, what would be a better way of understanding a nation, what could be more in national interest. So that way I find that even the most rabid critique of nation is actually helping the nation. Now, there may be a situation whereby nation building can become a justification to silence these critiques, right? And that is not helpful for the nation. That silencing of the critique goes against the whole idea of nation building. That's what I was trying to point out, that, a lot of things, be it in the sphere of developmental politics or in the sphere of other kind of political interventions, we find that in the name of nation building or in the name of doing good to nation, a lot of harm is being enacted, and that is something one should worry about.
Right. I think next question of mine is more about the methodology part of what you said, the sociology in South Asia. So immediate sense when we get these big words, right? So especially in fields like political science, if we say comparative governments, what we do is we take the politics of one country, politics of another country, constitution of a country, constitution of a country, and compare it. Now, when we say sociology of South Asia, does it mean comparative, or do we have to go beyond that, right? Or shared experience? How do we look at it?
Very good question. And this question I've faced on several occasions, and I've been conscious of this question for a very long time. If we are doing that, what I have heard all other colleagues do when they are talking about comparative politics, if you're doing the same thing in the name of Sociology of South Asia, which basically means putting together examples from different country context, now that alone does not suffice for South Asia. Then
It's
we
like
are
caste in Sri Lanka, caste in India, how women braid their hairs in Sri Lanka, how women braid their hairs in India. So how do we look?
Yeah. No, so that way we are being very naive supporter. If we are doing that, then we are very naive supporter of the cartographic idea of a region. Here in this case, South Asia. What is cartographic idea? The geopolitics, the geopolitical imagination of South Asia. The geopolitical imagination of South Asia is that South Asia is equal to country A plus country B plus country C plus country C, D plus so on and so forth, right? Now, if the idea of a region is reduced to this very what should we say, outrageous kind of arithmetic, then it becomes possible for you sometimes, as per your power, as per your interest, it becomes possible for you to sometimes erase country A and still say this is South Asia. Sometimes erase country C and then say South Asia. It becomes very difficult in this way. This game is very dicey game. This game has been suitable. This kind of arithmetic has been suitable for those who think from geopolitical point of view. State, it is easier for state to work with this arithmetic, to work with this kind of, arithmetic, because this arithmetic also keeps the territorial sovereignty along cartographic line intact, right? So there is no threat to each other. The kings have their kingdoms very well demarcated in this whole logic, right? And hence there is nothing to worry about. Now, for us, for you, and for citizens, for artists, for scholars, for students, for teachers, for those who are not working necessarily in that framework of state, we are part of state, and yet we have our activities which are beyond state. We are teaching students who are coming to us. We are writing for scholars who may be located anywhere in the region as well as anywhere in the globe, right? So that way we are transcending some of these boundaries, some of these borders. Through our work, we are transcending. An artist's work may be traveling across the region. A cinema filmmaker's work may be traveling across, right? It need not be screened only with the certification. It can be also watched in pirated copies through private kind of circulation, so and so forth. So with these kind of people, people like us, it is not necessary to abide by that cartographic logic, and it is also not helpful to abide by that cartographic logic. That cartographic logic for us is not conducive to give us a fair understanding of what I emphasize when I think of South Asian sociology. It would not, that cartographic logic will not help us understand the connections and flows, right? The simultaneity of connections and flows in the region. When I say South Asia, and when I think of sociology of South Asia, in South Asia, I am basically interested in those connections and flows. In spite of a sociologist or an anthropologist trying to put instances from these different country contexts, those things are already in connections. And it becomes necessary for sociological analysts to underline those connections, to underline as to how things have been moving around. We may not be aware. We may be trying to intellectually impose some kind of connection, but then those connections were already existent. And the real challenge is for us to underline, to explore and show that connections which are already existing, right? So I give some of the examples which were uh, very moving during the time of COVID and lockdown. So I give examples of this whole emotional trauma of the migrant workers, and that emotional trauma was across the globe, right? Now, in that kind of situation, it becomes very difficult to say that there is this emotional trauma in Sri Lanka, which can be called A. There is emotional trauma in Bangladesh, which can be called B. There is emotional trauma in India, which can be called C. And now South Asian emotional trauma is equal to A plus B plus C. We can't do that. It's horrendous, right? Isn't it? How does it sound to you?
It is very horrendous. And also it relegates to kind of a journalistic writing when we do it, right?
Exactly.
To bring it
Exactly.
down.
And there is nothing wrong with journalistic writing,
Yes.
as long as it is done by a journalist. And the journalist knows that he is writing a report of a certain kind. So journalists are doing far better job. They are doing their job. Academics are not doing their job. Academics are copying journalists, or maybe they're not copying. Academics have become some sort of journalists, right? So that is where the problem lies. South Asia cannot be thought in terms of these conglomerations, these kind of numeral or cartographic calculations. Instead, South Asia has to be understood as a larger vision, which have persisted over ages, which have persisted in oral traditions, which have persisted in mythology, which have persisted in popular culture. If you think of South Asia along that cultural trope, socio-cultural trope, you would realize that this is a very different kind of entity. South Asia as one kind of entity has been discussed in international relations and area studies, right? We may criticize the limitations of those approaches in IR, but they have done far better job than sociologists, than other variety of social scientists. At least IR gives you some idea of what South Asia means. In sociology, in history, in political science, we have not given any idea of what South Asia means. We have just tried to made a very poor clone of what IR gives us. So we are worse than we have no mouth, no standing to, no locus standi to criticize the IR approaches. IR has done far better job. Area studies has done far better job.
No,
So
I think I would like to further this critique, right? In your paper, you have actually talked about a metropolitan sociologist, or what is called metropolitan mindset, right? And there you have brought in a point of they sticking to positivism, right? And not going beyond it, despite knowing the limitations and teaching the limitations of that approach of positivism. So could you reflect on it? Like, what do you mean by this metropolitan scientists sticking to positivism, and why are they not breaking away from it?
see, in social sciences, positivism was the first very systematic kind of methodology, systematic kind of way of seeing. It's a first very legitimate framework which was and which emerged and celebrated and practiced. It seemed that if we can't have our own Isaac Newton, at least we have positivism. So that way, positivism was a very behaviorist, kind of way of seeing. The seeing is believing, or data. If you have data, indubitable data, uh, credible data, then you are safe. Then you can speak through that data, and facts should speak for itself. That these notions, right? So these notions somehow have survived even the age of the critique of positivism. We are all familiar with critique of positivism. We have learned about critique of positivism in our classroom, outside our classroom. We know that everything cannot be judged behaviorally. Everything that we see may not be true. And we also know that data can be fudged. And we know that facts don't speak for themselves. And then we also know that facts are also a realm of fiction, so on and so forth. So we are aware of the critique of positivism. But when it comes to the real nuts and bolts, most of those who are in the powerful position, and those are the people who can be called metropolitan uh, 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 social scientists. So those who are in powerful position, they want to retain these nuts and bolts. They do not want these nuts and bolts uh, to be questioned, right? They do not want to see that a student of history would be taking cinema as some kind of archive, right? They would discourage a seasoned metropolitan historian would like to discourage a neophyte historian who is looking at popular cinema and to understand certain notions in popular cinema would deem cinema as an archive, because the idea of archive, positivist idea of archive, is very secure. So how can you really look at cinema as some kind of archive? That notion. The same way, in social sciences, in different disciplines of social sciences, the nuts and bolts of positivism are retained by those who are in more decisive position. Why do I call them in decisive position? Because some of these universities where they are located, they're celebrated universities. Their position is considered very high position. They are also reading and writing very frequently. So therefore, whatever they would do, whatever they would practice, whatever they would say becomes very acceptable standard. And as a result, even in the margins, anywhere, even in the margins, there will be good mimicry of the metropolitan mindset, right? So you see that the, 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 the sovereignty of positivism is maintained thereby, from metro to non-metro spaces of social sciences, where the nuts and bolts are still kept intact, where one may be aware of the other ways of seeing, like social construction of reality, like hermeneutics, like some kind of social science, understanding social science through biographies, so many things. Understanding social sciences through street art, public art, No, all those things may be there, but because they cannot be studied properly according to the positivist framework, and therefore they have to be kept outside from the realm of studies. This perpetuity is what I was talking about.
Thank you so much. I think with that we'll end this podcast. But before we end, one larger question, right? If we have to ask you an advice that you would give for students to pursue this larger sociology of South Asia, what would that be? Some prescriptions.
First of all, be genuinely interested in intellectual advancement. Do not succumb to any kind of nuisance influence. There is abundance of nuisance around us, in that abundance one finds some rare flicker of intellectual possibility. Go for that flickering possibility rather than the powerful, robust nuisance body. That is first. If you are really conscious of the region of South Asia, see that whatever micro context that you have chosen may already have connections with the region, larger region. Try to establish that connection. Try to first of all uncover and then establish that connection as cogently as possible. Thirdly, even though we are scholars, we do researches, we write, we're also ordinary human beings. Be aware of the fact that there has to be a relationship between who you are ordinarily and what you do as an academic.
Can you suggest us one song from your playlist to listen after listening to this podcast?
Just one song? There's so many songs. I am most of the time.
You can take the liberty. Okay, 2-3 songs you can. So what are the 2 songs you want our listeners to listen after listening to our podcast?
There are quite a few songs, but I will name just 2 on your request. One is I Have a Dream by ABBA, and the other one could be Circle of Life from the film Lion King.
Yes. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. And I think with that note, we'll end this podcast. But I think there are so many questions to ask. But next time we record another episode, if I'm in Delhi, right? We are currently recording it online. But when we meet in Delhi, I would love to record a larger podcast about you talking and you being a no-nonsense sociologist. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.